True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
Heather Rich was only 16 years old when she was brutally victimized by people she knew and felt she could trust. A petite and pretty girl with translucent gray-blue eyes, Heather liked to laugh and she enjoyed the attention of her peers. But adolescence is not everything that they make it out to be in the movies. As a cheerleader and a nominee for homecoming queen, Heather was also a troubled girl who was testing her own limits. Join us at the quiet end for The Body in Belknap Creek. Now, it's true that Heather made a poor decision when she snuck out of her home on the night of October 3rd, 1996, but the decisions made by her killers were careless, cruel, and really just plain evil. When Heather was reported missing, the police dismissed her as a runaway who would return home in a day or two, but her poor parents, they knew better. The search for Heather would last for just 1 week, but it took much longer for investigators to reveal the really shocking truth of what happened to Heather on that horrible night. So this case was recommended to us by two people, Natanya in a voicemail and Mike B in an email, and then since then we've had a few other people kind of say, yeah, we'd like you to cover that, so that's what we're doing. And Dick, as always, has brought us a fantastic beer.
I did. This is a favorite brewery in Oklahoma. Prairie Artisan Ales. It's in Tulsa. And the beer for today is a barrel-aged Birthday Bomb. This is an American Imperial Stout. Big boy, 14.7% alcohol by volume. So share this with a friend or friends. Take it slow and easy. Beer is a black color, dark orange head, no lacing to it. Beautiful aroma and taste. Coffee, chocolate, vanilla, booze, spicy. And when you taste it, it's coffee, chocolate, vanilla, bourbon, and some chili. Little heat at the end. Beer's very smooth considering it's 15% almost alcohol. So, enjoy.
Yes. Now, full disclosure, we've already had a couple of these, and they're high alcohol beers. But with the holidays coming, family and everything, drinking really has to escalate at this point. Just a little.
For your family's arrival.
Yes, exactly. So we're enjoying this. It is delicious. 14.7% is a hell of a beer. But I'm just going to tell you, after 2 or 3 sips, you won't even notice.
No.
It is smooth.
When the in-laws come, I can be witty and charming.
Absolutely. That's true. So let's open up another bottle.
Okay.
All right, Dickie, stagger on down here to the quiet end with me. We're going to talk about this case, which is an upsetting case.
This is a horrible case.
It really is.
I read it, and the stuff you had written about it's just horrendous. I can't even begin to describe it.
So, it's not just the crime itself. It's who committed the crime. It's the aftermath of it. So let's get started on this.
Right. You'll talk about this later, but it isn't just the killers and the victim. It's the families of these people.
It always is.
Terribly affected.
They totally are, and I don't think we think about that enough in the true crime community. So you really do need to think about that, because family members' lives will never be the same after this sort of thing.
No, and they weren't.
Okay, you get us started.
So everyone in Waurika, Oklahoma, which is a town of just about 2,000 people, knew Heather or knew of her. Located in a remote region of southern Oklahoma, Waurika is just across the Red River from Texas. And as a tiny community, there really isn't much for the local teenagers to do, for fun and distraction. Heather was energetic and laughed easily, and like many girls her age, she was a bit boy crazy, maybe more than a bit. Her 3 brothers tried to protect her from boys who might try to take advantage of her, but she definitely had a mind of her own. Most people liked Heather, who was friendly and kind to everybody. She was voted sophomore class favorite. She was a Waurika Eagles cheerleader who had the top spot on the human pyramid, and she was nominated for homecoming queen just days before she disappeared.
Yeah, so you might look at those things and think, oh, this girl had it made. But it's never that simple.
No, there's other forces at play here, aren't there?
There are, and we really don't know what people are dealing with unless we're in their shoes, which of course we weren't. But Heather was definitely more than a pretty face. She was bright and hardworking, and she held a place on her high school's honor roll. But in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, her behavior had been changing. It was a bit concerning. She was suspended from school for being drunk while cheering at a football game, and at home she was becoming withdrawn and kind of sullen. A close friend would later say that Heather was a very troubled girl, despite all of the reasons she had to feel optimistic about her future. So no one knew what to think. When Heather climbed out of her bedroom window on a school night just after 11 o'clock and didn't return home. So Heather's family had moved to Waurika from the town of Lawton back in 1974 before she was even born. Heather's parents, Dwayne and Gail, believed that Waurika would be a quieter, safer place for their children to grow up. Now it seemed peaceful and more insulated from the rest of the world. In fact, it reminded Gail and Dwayne of their hometown of Elgin, Oklahoma.
Now, Gail and Dwayne got together after her father bid on Dwayne for one day of labor at the Future Farmers of America auction. He did the bidding because Gail had pointed him out. She thought he was cute and was hoping to get his attention. Well, it worked. First date they went on was to a prison rodeo. Then they got married when Gail was just 17 years old. She was offered a full scholarship at the University of Oklahoma, but she turned it down. Instead, she stayed home, teaching Sunday school and playing the church piano.
Well, as much as Waurika seemed like an idyllic small town to Heather's parents, its lack of things to do was problematic for the town's teenage population. There was no rec center, not even a movie theater, no mall, and no restaurants open late at night. They even had to leave town if they wanted to visit the closest fast food place. In the fall of 1996, just weeks after the beginning of the school year, Heather's boyfriend, Randy Wood, broke up with her. So he did this after hearing a rumor that Heather had gone skinny dipping at a co-ed pool party. And within a week of the breakup, an acquaintance of theirs, 20-year-old Dennis Wayne Goss, died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his head. Heather appeared to be really shook up by the breakup and this apparent suicide. She became more rebellious, experimenting with drugs and paying less attention to her studies. Now her mother, Gail, who had no idea, later learned that Heather had started using methamphetamine, which was kind of a big thing in the town, but the parents had no idea.
Right, but that's a pretty heavy drug to get involved in.
Oh, yeah, it's serious.
Certainly much more than smoking a little weed or drinking alcohol.
Yes, it's very addictive and very damaging to the human body and mind.
And according to Randy, it was not unusual for Heather to sneak out at night so she could smoke a cigarette, catch a ride downtown, looking for other teenagers that were regularly cruising this 3-block strip. And the only entertainment in town, as Randy remembered, was getting drunk and partying. Heather and her friends would drive the back roads out to the lake or drive out to empty pastures where they built bonfires, drank alcohol, and smoked pot. Methamphetamine was used by the local teens, but Heather hadn't tried it until Randy introduced her to it.
And this is something you wouldn't expect because Randy was the captain of the football team and a really popular senior. But apparently he too was heading down a bad path.
So it seems. Jeez.
And I think a lot of this can be blamed on no activities in the town. Not a lot to do or look forward to. I've always thought that we need more activities in our communities for teenagers. Because if you're not a jock, and you're not studying all the time, you need something to do with the other kids.
Well, yeah, but I would say that there's still, even in a town of 2,000 people, there's still things that kids can do.
Oh, yeah, but are they going to think of those things? Because they're going to fall on the first things they see.
There's the problem.
Yeah. Teens are always kind of a problem, to be honest.
So 6 days before she disappeared, Heather showed up drunk on the sidelines of a high school football game. For this, she was suspended 3 days, and she was at risk for being thrown off the cheerleading team. Her parents were paying attention, and they were concerned. In fact, Gail had made an appointment for Heather to see a therapist. Unfortunately, Heather didn't live long enough to make that appointment.
Well, as Heather became more distant with her family, the household was also dealing with another crisis. Dwayne, an electrician, had suffered severe burns over 65% of his body after a transformer blew up on him on a job. And his injuries made it impossible for Dwayne to be the husband and father he'd always been. He'd always been really involved and put his children first, but now he was a patient and he needed daily care. He underwent surgeries for skin grafts, and he would need to learn to walk again with extensive physical therapy. So that summer and into the fall, Heather fed her father and changed the dressings on his wounds. Gail had to work longer hours just to pay the bills, so this left Heather to do much of the cooking and cleaning as well.
It's a lot of pressure on a teen.
It is, and a lot of pressure on the parents just trying to make a living and just to get by, basically.
Absolutely.
So the chaos in the Rich family's lives at the time of Heather's disappearance left Gail feeling really inadequate as a mother. She didn't take the time she would have under more normal circumstances to meet Heather's friends and check on her daughter's whereabouts. She and Heather had always been close, but Gail really had not understood the extent of her daughter's destructive behavior. Heather was not only using drugs, she had begun cutting herself on her legs with razor blades. So she was definitely going through some things.
She was. And then the straw that broke the camel's back, October 2nd, Gail got a $300 phone bill. Heather had called her friends from church camp, talking for hours. So here they are scrimping and worrying about where the money's coming from. And boom, there's this $300 phone bill, which they couldn't afford to pay. So, exhausted from working all those 16-hour days, Gail lost her temper with Heather. "All you ever do is cost me money," Gail snapped in anger. Heather had gone to her room to be alone. And then later that evening, Heather went to her parents' bedroom, where she wished her father a good night and told him that she loved him. But she was still pissed off at her mother, so she ignored Gail as she walked out of the room.
Yeah, so that night, Heather snuck out of the house to meet Josh Bagwell for a first date. Josh was born in Wichita, Texas in 1978. In high school, Josh lived with his wealthy grandparents in Waurika. So he was one of the more wealthy kids in the school. As a teen, Josh was described as a snobby rich kid who was used to getting whatever he wanted. He was spoiled at home and not disciplined. And Josh didn't show any fear of breaking the law, so this is all very dangerous. Actually, when he was arrested as a teen for a DUI, he didn't even seem to be bothered by it. He immediately demanded a lawyer and resisted arrest. So very cocky and entitled already. At age 18, Josh had already gone through 6 new cars that his parents had purchased for him. So some kids really envied him, and others were just disgusted by his sense of entitlement and rude behavior toward others. Randy Wood was impressed by Josh's wealth and hung out with him quite often. Heather was a sophomore, and Josh Bagwell was a senior. So Heather had been flirting with him, and she was able to secure her place in his white Dodge Stealth for the homecoming parade. And apparently she was really happy about that.
So this is after she had broken up, or after her boyfriend had broken up with her?
Yes.
That she was angling to be in the homecoming parade?
Well, she may have been
Josh?
angling for that anyway, because Randy was up for homecoming king.
Ah, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but it's believed that Heather left home on the night of October 2nd to meet up with Josh Bagwell in a trailer at the home of his grandfather, so out back of their house. Bagwell had already been drinking with friends Curtis Gambill and Randy Wood since early that evening. So Curtis Gambill had moved to Waurika from Montague County, Texas. In October of 1996, he was a 19-year-old high school dropout. He was living with his grandmother in Terrell, Oklahoma, about 20 miles from Waurika. So Gambill was described as a violent and antisocial person. When he was in school, he'd forced other boys to fight each other, and he was also known to kill livestock for fun. Gamble had been in several youth detention centers, and at age 17, he'd been committed to a psychiatric hospital. Then in February of 1996, Gamble was convicted of feloniously carrying a firearm and received a 5-year suspended sentence for that.
Well, this kid is trouble.
Yeah, he was known to be trouble. Josh a bit too, but Gamble definitely known to be violent and a problem.
Yeah, I mean, Josh just sounds like a typical teenage asshole.
Well, I don't know about typical, but asshole I think is pretty fitting.
But Gamble sounds like a dangerous one.
Well, anyone who's killing animals to me is a violent person who can be very dangerous to humans as well.
Well, this gun charge, that's just a bunch of red flags. So Bagwell and Gamble became friends over their shared interests in camping, fishing, and shooting. Gamble was described by his grandmother as brooding after his best friend, Dennis Wayne Goss, had died. In fact, Gamble had told his grandmother that Goss had not committed suicide, but had been murdered, and he intended to find out who shot him.
Yeah,
so this is also what? Is this an acquaintance of Heather?
Yeah, they knew him, and he was good friends with Curtis Gamble.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of talk about what actually happened with Goss.
Yeah, I'll bet the rumor mill was running.
It was, and the case would eventually be reopened. Now, Randy Wood and his single mom spent his childhood moving from place to place throughout Oklahoma. In 1996, they were one of the poorest families in Waurika, living in a rundown rental house that had broken windows. So Wood began smoking pot when he was just in the 3rd grade, and then he moved up to stealing prescription drugs from his mother. So it's kind of interesting that he was able to be successful on the football team. He must have had some natural talent. Although he had many disadvantages in his youth, he did try to improve his situation, and he was known and admired as a quiet, thoughtful teen who dressed in polo shirts and khakis, so kind of preppy. Wood walked 1 mile to school each day, where he was well respected by his football teammates as their captain. So although Wood was well liked in Waurika, he was known around town as being a bit slow and naive. He and Heather were a couple for about 5 months, and they attended church services together and talked for hours and hours. So Wood was allowed to drive his grandmother's old Cadillac, and he would drive Heather to her orthodontist appointments. The two were in a romantic relationship, but they hadn't had sex. Many people mistook them for just friends, and Wood would become jealous when she talked to other guys.
So the morning of October 3rd, when Heather was not in her room, Gail knew that she hadn't run away. None of her clothes were missing, her diary was open on the bed, and her makeup bag had been left behind. Gail made calls and knocked on people's doors. She called the police to file a missing persons report, but the sheriff's deputy refused to file a report. After Gail told them about their fight over the phone bill, they didn't take Heather's disappearance seriously at all. They assured Gail that Heather had probably just run off for a few hours to give her parents a scare. Police recommended that Gail stay home and wait for her daughter to return.
So I can kind of see if a teenager has a fight with her parents and then doesn't return home, you might say she probably just ran off because she's angry. But I still think you need to treat it with the possibility of her being in danger, which they didn't do.
Yeah, no, I think the thought process is probably appropriate, but they didn't have much empathy or sympathy.
Well, no, and they didn't really listen to Gail, who, of course, knew her daughter better than they did.
Right.
So this made Gail really angry. She knew her daughter. She continued conducting her own search. A friend at the high school gave Gail the day's absentee list, which included Heather and Randy Wood. So Gail called Randy at home and asked him if he had seen Heather. Randy said that he hadn't seen her, adding that he had been with Josh Bagwell all night until 6 a.m. that morning. To Gail, he seemed very tired and he had a flat affect. So she tried pressing him for more information, but he just repeated that he'd been with Bagwell. So Gail asked Randy if he would tell her if he knew anything that could help her find Heather, and he answered, "Yes, ma'am." But Gail still felt like Randy Wood was hiding something from her. Worried that she wasn't getting the full story from Josh, from Randy, Gail called Josh Bagwell. So Randy and Josh had been close friends, but they really seemed like an odd pair. Josh was a pampered young man who lived with his grandparents, Toad and Hattie Dale Anderson. And the Andersons liked to show off their wealth. They lived in a very nice big house and drove expensive cars. Josh's mom was divorced, she was a lawyer, and he'd moved in with the grandparents when he was 16. His white Dodge Stealth was the showiest car owned by any teenager in Waurika, and it certainly wasn't his first car.
Oh, what'd you say? He'd been through half a dozen cars?
Yes. Just no real respect for the work that goes into most people having things.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So on the day of Heather's disappearance, Josh was also absent from school. When Gail went to the Andersons' house, Josh's grandmother, Hattie Dale, answered the door. She'd been out back cleaning a trailer where Josh had thrown a party the night before with his friends.
So that right there is bothersome. He's having parties on a school night and she's going out and cleaning for him?
She's cleaning it up for him.
Yeah.
Because he's asleep.
Uh-huh.
And he's unavailable.
Right. So that just shows you how entitled this kid was, or this young man was.
No kidding. So Hattie Dale wouldn't wake him up, so Gail didn't have a chance to talk to him.
No, she didn't want to bother him because he'd been up all night partying.
Poor baby.
Yeah.
But Gail did make a note in her mind about Josh's grandmother cleaning the trailer.
Well, that to me is very interesting.
When the members of Heather's family were finally able to question Josh, he shrugged his shoulders and claimed not to have seen her for a week. No other teens had any information to help them find Heather.
No, days passed with no sign of Heather, and the Rich family was becoming desperate. They hired a private detective, and they used a friend's bloodhounds to sniff through wooded areas. So the police finally did become involved in the search. When tips came in about Heather, Gail learned that Waurika had a very hidden and pervasive drug culture. There were actually several meth labs in the town, and people were selling the drugs in most neighborhoods, a lot of them to teens. So this was very shocking to Gail, who had raised their 4 children in this town and knew nothing about the drugs. But apparently all the kids knew all about it. So this search for Heather was very painful for her family. They're worried sick. Gail felt like the teens in the area weren't telling her everything either. In fact, there were several versions of what happened to Heather on the night she vanished. 8 days into her disappearance, a body was found in nearby Belknap Creek. This creek was in Texas, just over the Oklahoma border. If there'd been a heavy rain, the body would have drifted out into the Red River and may have never been found. Over the creek, on Belknap Creek Bridge, police found blood that someone had tried to hide by putting dirt over it. So now investigators believed that the murder had happened up on the bridge and that the body had been dumped.
Yeah, a rancher driving down a dirt road with his 7-year-old granddaughter had spotted the body. The little girl had seen it first, pointing to a muddy area near the bank with overgrown greenbrier vines. And the rancher squinted to see the body. So he decided at that point that it must be a drowned calf who had washed downstream. But the next morning, the rancher made his rounds and stopped out by Belknap Creek Bridge. A pale object had floated closer, and he could see that it was the badly damaged body of a girl.
So that same day, the body was identified as missing teen Heather Rich. Her face was completely unrecognizable because she'd been shot in the head. She had also been shot 8 times in her back, and this was all with a shotgun. So she was initially identified by her gold heart-shaped ring, which had been given to her on her 16th birthday. So Heather's parents were devastated by the news. When the news spread through the town, there was shock and really disbelief that this could happen in Little Waurika. Randy Wood heard the news at school the next day, and that night he went to the homecoming dance, where he was crowned the Waurika High School's homecoming king. Now that to me is very strange.
So it was all worthwhile because he got the king.
Well, I just don't understand. If a local teen is murdered, wouldn't you just cancel the homecoming or at least delay it?
Or at least postpone it. Yeah.
And this guy who was her boyfriend goes ahead and gets crowned king?
Yeah, well.
To me, that's just heartless. It's really creepy.
Where were his priorities, right?
Right, or the adults at least. The adults in the community could have made different decisions, but they didn't. And I just find that insulting and disgusting, really.
Yes. So a team of 20 investigators interviewed over 100 people in the days that followed. But nobody wanted to talk. Among the high school kids, there's a party culture and a code making the kids reluctant to talk. They kind of had an us against the police attitude. So then a week passed with little or no progress in the case. One of the credible leads that they followed was that Heather had sneaked out of her house to go to a party at Josh Bagwell's house. Randy Wood had told Gail that he had been with Josh until 6 a.m., but he insisted they hadn't seen Heather. He claimed that the only people who were there were Curtis Gamble, Josh Bagwell, and himself.
Right, but these two guys, Gamble and Bagwell, were pretty shady characters.
That they were.
So Curtis Gamble's grandmother, Reba Robbins, was very upset by the news of Heather's death. Now, she was already familiar with the pain and misery that comes along with losing someone to a violent crime. Her own mother was one of serial killer Henry Lee Lucas's first victims. And in 1982, Lucas had stabbed her mother in the heart and shoved her into a wood-burning stove in Ringgold, only a few miles from the Belknap Creek. So in recent years, Reba had been worried about her grandson Curtis. He'd been caught in school with an unloaded gun and was sent to a juvenile facility. After that, he started using drugs. Curtis had a reputation as someone who was mean and a troublemaker. Curtis was tan with dirty blonde hair and green eyes. He liked to camp and fish and roam around in the woods. Reba watched her grandson as she made supper on the day Heather's body was found, and she had to wonder what he knew about Heather's murder. He was sitting on the back porch, playing her old guitar, when she decided to approach him. She called out from the kitchen, telling him that the missing girl from Waurika had been found. Then she paused, and she added that the girl's body had been found floating in Belknap Creek. Curtis stopped playing the guitar for a moment, and Reba began to say more, but he cut her off angrily. "Grandma," he said, "I don't give a fuck about that little girl." So that was quite shocking. I would be very disturbed to hear that.
That's an interesting statement.
Well, yeah, if your own son says something that heartless, or a grandson, it'd be upsetting to me. And I think it was to her. But she was kind of used to what a little dickhead he was.
Yeah, I think she knew what kinds of responses she would get. She knew how his mind worked.
Apparently, yes.
Investigators had been following up on a red herring in the case. This was a meth dealer who may, I say may, have known Heather. But once he was alibied, they moved on to look into the party Josh had thrown on the night of her disappearance. Curtis, Josh, and Randy all claimed they had been playing dominoes and drinking whiskey in Josh's party trailer that night. They all said they had not seen Heather, but investigators were skeptical about their alibi. Randy seemed to know something that he just wasn't sharing with the police. He was often sitting on his porch with his head in his hands. He was drinking heavily and getting high. This is pretty much every day. In a profile done in the local newspaper about him being the homecoming king, he is brooding and distant. He shrugged off many of the questions, and he said that his favorite color was black.
Yeah, that's kind of a red flag.
Jeez.
Now, two detectives decided to stop by football practice one day to talk with Randy. When Randy walked off the field and saw the detectives, he froze. The detectives were becoming more convinced that Randy was somehow involved in Heather's murder. Randy did stick with his original story, but he seemed detached, and he told his story like he was just reading it off of a sheet of paper. So this led detectives to believe that Randy had rehearsed this story, and probably with someone else. Now, the next day, a local sheriff's deputy had helpful information about the case. Josh Bagwell had purchased 4 boxes of shotgun shells at the local Beaver hardware store just days before Heather's murder. This was Winchester double-aught buckshot, the ammunition that the firearms expert had identified as the kind that was used by Heather's murderer. The hardware store's owner had also identified Curtis Gamble in a photo lineup. He'd been with Josh in the store when that ammo was bought. So the detectives decided to visit Curtis's grandmother, who one detective had known since her mother was killed by Henry Lee Lucas. The grandmother had not been very forthcoming with deputies, but when she saw the detective who had helped to find her mother's killer, she agreed to talk with him. And during the conversation, she mentioned that Curtis did have a shotgun, but that he'd told her he'd gotten rid of it a while back.
Right, so he said.
That's what he said.
Forensic tests showed that the buckshot and wadding found in Heather's body was consistent with double-aught Winchester ammunition, and that the murder weapon was a Mossberg M9 shotgun. Investigators also learned that, with permission given from Bagwell's mother back on October 1st, Carolyn Beaver sold Josh Bagwell and Curtis Gamble 4 boxes of that same ammunition from Beaver Hardware in Waurika, and that Gamble owned a Mossberg M9 shotgun. Curtis's grandmother told investigators about the gun that Curtis called Old Blackie. Curtis Gamble's Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun would later be identified as the murder weapon.
Well, later it came out that Curtis had bragged about his ultimate fantasy, which was to kidnap a girl, rape her, and blow her head off. Those are his words. He had talked about this fantasy when he was just 15 years old and staying in a juvenile detention center. This was after he had threatened to kill several teachers there. In addition to his shooting livestock for fun, Curtis ran with a rough crowd of meth addicts, including his friend who had died, Dennis Wayne Goss. And remember, Curtis said that Goss had been murdered, and he was planning to find the person responsible.
He's going to investigate.
That's what he said. So Curtis Gamble was brought in for questioning, and he actually broke. According to one detective, Gamble knew he was in trouble, so he told them a story that pointed to Randy Wood as Heather's killer. He was cooperative and even appeared to be enjoying the attention from the detectives. Gamble offered the details in a very matter-of-fact tone as well. Gamble claimed not to know Heather before that night. He said that she snuck out of her house to meet Josh for a date. And he explained that he and Randy had left the trailer out back of Josh's house to give them some time alone. And while they were outside, Josh got Heather drunk. So Curtis Gamble said that Josh had sex with Heather for a couple of hours, and then he and Randy Wood came back and saw that she was wasted. She was kissing him and Randy, he said, and they thought they were going to have sex with her as well. But then she passed out. So they drank more, Gamble said, and when Heather woke up, she was crying and screaming. Then she passed out again, and Josh started freaking out. He said he didn't want to go down for raping Heather. Randy was nervous about the rape charges as well, Gamble said, because Randy had tried to have sex with Heather. So Randy carried her, still unconscious, to Josh's pickup, and they all drove out to the Belknap Creek bridge. Woody shot her, Curtis claimed, using Randy Wood's nickname. Then Randy said to throw her over, and they all picked her up and threw her into the creek.
This is just horrible, and it's told in just this matter-of-fact voice.
It's so disturbing, I know. It's like her life meant nothing to these boys.
Yeah, detectives believe most of Curtis's story, but they sensed that Curtis had to be the one to kill her. The murder weapon was his, and the crime scene was a place that only he knew well. So Randy told nearly the same story to detectives later that night, but in his version, Curtis was the one with the gun. Heather had been in and out of consciousness when Curtis had sex with her too, according to Randy. He said that he had his pants down, but he didn't have sex with her. When they arrived at the creek, Randy said they sat Heather on the bridge and she fell over. He got back in the truck and sat there with his hands covering his face, and then he heard the shots. And after the shots stopped, Randy looked up and saw Curtis holding the shotgun.
So Randy passed a polygraph test, and Curtis failed his. But why hadn't Randy tried to save Heather? I mean, she had been his girlfriend. He should have had some feelings for her.
So you would think.
You would think so. Now, Randy said he really didn't believe that it would happen until they got to the bridge. He said that he'd been hoping Curtis was just joking, but when they got out of the trunk, he saw that Curtis had the shotgun, and that he was excited and he was giving orders to him and Josh. So Randy he said, let it happen, and he said that was because he was just scared to death of Curtis Gamble. So it's really hard to know what to think about that.
It is. So here's a summary of what likely happened on the night Heather was murdered, based on testimony by Randy Wood and evidence gathered by investigators.
Yeah, because I think we really have to discount what Josh and Curtis said, because they're just not credible.
Yeah, well, and I'm not sure Randy is either, but...
I wouldn't say he's 100%, but I think there is some truth to what he's saying.
Yeah, he's a little bit more credible.
Yes, he did pass the polygraph, and he did admit to letting it happen.
So Josh had been late to pick up Heather at the church near her house that night. So Heather headed off walking about a mile to the trailer behind Josh's house, where he had mentioned that he and some friends would be hanging out. So no one was there when she got there, and she waited. When Josh showed up at the trailer, Curtis Gamble and Randy Wood were with him, and the three boys had been drinking whiskey. At the trailer, they began to drink a case of beer, and according to Randy, he knew very little about Gamble's past and is planning on drinking with the two guys. The three of them had bought some snacks, and they tried to get more people to come to the trailer, but no one else wanted to party on a school night. So the three of them went to the trailer after telling Josh's grandparents that they were going to play dominoes in the trailer.
So I do feel a little judgy about the grandparents. Maybe you should be checking about what's going on out there. They're not of legal drinking age.
Yeah.
Now, they did go to pick up Heather near the church, but she had already left, and they were surprised to see her at the trailer. All four of them went inside the trailer, and Heather began to drink from a bottle of gin that Josh had taken from his grandparents' liquor cabinet. Then Randy had taken the keys to Josh's truck so that he and Curtis could leave Josh and Heather alone at the trailer for a while. So Randy and Curtis drove around some backwoods, and they did finally return to the trailer. Josh answered the door and told them to wait a minute while he got dressed. Randy noticed that the bottle of gin was nearly empty. Heather was in the bedroom, and she came out with no clothes on. She was very drunk. She was so drunk and high that she couldn't even stand up on her own. And then she was crying and apologizing to Randy, who had been her boyfriend before. So it seems that Josh had raped her during this time.
Yeah, so Randy and Heather went back to the bedroom together, and she's continuing to apologize. She's naked. Randy starts touching her. He was getting ready to have sex with her. Then she passed out, so he stopped. He says he got dressed and got another beer. And later he would admit to penetrating Heather with a finger. Certainly that's rape under the law, but Randy did not consider that rape. However, he had a hard time accepting that he had been a participant and not just an observer.
Well, and that's an issue with Randy throughout this whole event.
Very ambivalent.
Yes, and he's thinking, well, if I didn't shoot her, then I'm not a killer, but anyone involved can be found guilty of murder for this.
That's right.
So back to what happened that night. Curtis went back into the bedroom with Heather, and whatever happened between them, Randy didn't see or hear. But Curtis came out and told him that Heather was awake. Then Randy went to check on her, but she was still passed out. So the thought here is that Curtis likely raped Heather as well.
While she was unconscious.
Yes, and she had woken up and screamed, and then passed out again. So this is just horrible. But the three continued to drink beer and talk. Then Heather woke up screaming again, and Curtis began to freak out. He said that Heather was going to accuse them of rape. He was on probation for a shooting incident when he had fired at a truck that was driving down the road. So Curtis said, "I'm not going down for rape," and that's when he started talking about killing Heather. Randy said that he thought he was just talking and didn't take him seriously. But a few minutes later, Curtis told Josh to go get the truck, and Randy got Heather dressed.
And Randy said that he thought they were going to drive around, get her sobered up, and then drop her off at her home. But Josh got the truck and pulled up next to the trailer. Randy laid her down on the back seat when all three of the guys sat up front. So Josh started driving out of town over a back highway to the town of Terrell. They were driving for a long time when Curtis got behind the wheel and said that he knew where to go. He drove until they got to Belknap Creek Bridge, very rural area that Randy was not at all familiar with. That's when this all started to feel real to Randy. Curtis was actually planning to kill Heather.
Well, Curtis told Josh and Randy to put Heather on the bridge, so they sat her up against a guardrail, and she was still passed out. So Randy would say he felt like he couldn't stop what was going to happen. It seemed hopeless to him then. But then he would later say that if he could do it again, he would have saved Heather. Now at the time, he felt like he was doing whatever was necessary to survive himself. He said he was afraid of Curtis. He got back into the truck and sat there with his head in his hands, and a minute or so later, he heard many shotgun shots. And when he got out of the truck, he saw the blood, and he saw Heather's head, which had been completely shot open. It was a terrible scene. He said he stood there in shock as Josh used a shoestring to tie a rock around Heather's ankle. So according to Randy, Curtis was reloading the gun, and he was afraid that he would be the one to be killed next. So he said he followed instructions and helped them to throw Heather's body into the water. Then Randy picked up the shotgun shells and covered the blood on the bridge with some dirt, and they all left together in the truck.
So Randy's version of events was the most believable and matched the forensic evidence. Curtis's version was that Randy had shot Heather in a jealous rage after she had had sex with Josh. The DA found that implausible because Randy had no history of violence. The shotgun used to kill Heather was Curtis's, and only Curtis was familiar with the Belknap Creek Bridge. He had gone fishing there quite a bit when he was a younger kid. So Josh Bagwell, Curtis Gambill, Randy Wood were all arrested in the late hours of October 24, 1996. They were formally charged with first-degree murder on October 25th.
So when the arrest warrant was served on Josh Bagwell, his home was searched too. Inside they found 2 swords, 2 assault rifles, and a book on bomb making. When an arresting officer suggested that Heather's murder had been keeping him up at night, Bagwell just smirked at him and said, "You just woke me up. Did it look like I was having trouble sleeping?" So very smug.
Yeah, little asshole.
Yes. Of the 3 murder suspects, only Bagwell exercised his right to remain silent and gave no statement to police. He also refused to take a polygraph. In jail, Bagwell bragged that there wasn't enough evidence to try him for murder.
So Curtis Gambill, who was the first to go to trial, presented a problem for prosecutors. In order to convict Josh Bagwell of capital murder, they needed testimony about Josh knowing of the plan to kill Heather before they got to the Belknap Creek Bridge. They sought to get the death penalty for Curtis, but during jury selection he took a plea bargain. So Curtis would admit that he shot Heather, and he would testify against Josh. In return, he would be spared the death penalty, and the state accepted that deal, even though it meant giving up the death penalty for Heather's killer. So after Curtis pleaded guilty and was given a 30-year sentence, upon hearing the guilty verdict, he flew into a rage, grabbing a bailiff by his neck and trying to choke him. It actually took 6 men to wrestle Curtis to the ground.
Yeah, so he was a dangerous person. Now, even with Curtis's testimony, there were doubts that the state would convict Josh Bagwell. Josh had refused to give any statement to investigators, and he was the only one of the 3 boys who did not admit any guilt or take a polygraph test. Coming from wealth, his family had hired a team of high-priced defense attorneys to get him off. The case against him depended on the testimony of Curtis and Randy, who could implicate Josh in the murder scheme, but who could also damage their credibility by pointing fingers at each other as the shooter. So Josh's family's attitude was that the state prosecutor was just a country bumpkin who couldn't win the case, and that Josh, their golden boy, hadn't done anything wrong. In fact, they were so certain that he would be acquitted that they brought his sports car to the courthouse while the jury was deliberating, planning for Josh to be able to just drive it home and be done.
Yep.
From the beginning of Josh Bagwell's trial, the defense worked to put Heather's character on trial, portraying her as a promiscuous drunk. Very little was said about the boys drinking or the probability that they had raped her. The defense's argument was that Josh couldn't have raped Heather because she was always ready and willing to have sex. The defense even went so far as to cross-examine Heather's mother, Gail, about her dead daughter's imperfections, her smoking, her bulimia, her marijuana use. So this is just disgusting. Now Josh sat at the defense table taking notes on a yellow legal pad and having no apparent issue with the re-victimization of his victim for his own benefit. No problem with that at all.
No. Well, again, his attorneys are interested in getting him acquitted, so they'll do what they need to do.
Well, absolutely, but I just feel like he was raised to just feel entitled and to have no empathy.
Well, there's no question
He's
about
really
that.
a sociopath. So, of course, they were worried that Josh was going to be acquitted. Curtis had originally agreed to testify against Josh, but he backed out of his plea agreement, insisting that it was Randy who shot Heather and that Josh had known nothing about his plan to kill her. And then there was another big setback. Randy, who was scheduled to testify the very next day, was backing out of his plea bargain as well. But Randy Wood had different ideas. He had a guilty conscience and he still wanted to testify against Josh, but he didn't want to accept a plea bargain in return because he was afraid it would damage the credibility of his testimony for the jury. So Randy did actually sacrifice his own future. He turned down a 40-year sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years, and he testified. He incriminated himself and opened himself up to a mandatory life sentence for murder. He could even face a death sentence. Now, Randy's attorney urged him to take this plea deal, but he'd already made up his mind. He said he wanted everyone to know that he was telling the truth, because he thought he owed at least that to Heather and her family.
Well, he developed a conscience all of a sudden.
He did. Now, I don't know if I 100% believe it, because I think there were some benefits to him as well. Like, he didn't want people to think that he had actually shot her. So,
Okay.
so Randy testified that Josh had known all about the plan to kill Heather, and contrary to what the defense had said, Josh had been in the trailer when the decision was made to shoot Heather. Before the shooting, Josh had helped carry her from the pickup to the bridge, Randy said. Then afterward, he had weighed Heather's body down with a rock and helped to throw her into the creek. But Randy Wood did admit to putting clothes back on the passed-out Heather's body after the sexual assaults, and he had carried her to the truck. Then he had helped Bagwell take her body out to the bridge. So he wasn't completely innocent.
No. So then Josh took the stand next, and he portrayed himself as a polite and respectful young man. He testified that he hadn't known about a plan to kill Heather, and that it was Randy who had killed her. Josh strayed just one time from his well-prepared script, but it was a very revealing slip-up. After hearing gunshots while urinating near the bridge that night, he said he ran back to see what had happened. Then, as if watching the events happening right in front of him, he said, "I see Curtis. Excuse me, I see Randy lowering the gun." A bit of a slip, isn't it?
It seemed pretty significant, yeah. Bagwell tried to portray Randy Wood as a lying, scheming, drug-abusing, jealous killer who had been angry at Heather for having sex with his drinking buddies, then rejecting him by screaming in her sleep when he tried to fondle her. The defense attorney did succeed in having Randy Wood acknowledge that Bagwell did not explicitly agree to kill Heather, nor did he carry Heather out to the pickup that night. But the redirect examination of Wood brought out the legally important facts about Bagwell's awareness of Curtis Gamble's intent to kill Heather, as well as Bagwell's assistance in disposing of her body and covering up her blood on the bridge.
So after more than 7 hours of jury deliberation on February 17, 1998, Bagwell was found guilty of capital murder and conspiracy to commit capital murder. So capital murder got him an automatic life sentence, and for the conspiracy charge, the jury deliberated for 3 hours before recommending a concurrent 99-year sentence This was because of the brutality of the crime.
But concurrent means at the same time.
So if he's got life without parole, it kind of doesn't matter that he's got another 99-year sentence.
Probably not, but at least it makes it pretty certain that he will not ever get out of prison.
No, it doesn't look like it.
A fine of $10,000 was also imposed with that conspiracy conviction. Now, Josh Bagwell's mother believed that Randy Wood had received a secret deal, and she accused the DA of prosecutorial misconduct, blaming the jury for not following the judge's instructions. His defense team said that they would appeal the jury's decision and request a new trial. As the jury read its verdict, Heather's mother, Gail, kissed Heather's ring. That's really all she had left of her daughter. In addition to Josh's sports car, his family had also brought dozens of balloons and gifts to the courthouse for him. They'd just been so sure that he would be acquitted. It's kind of disgusting, but it's very satisfying that he wasn't. Now, after hearing the verdict, they were pretty stunned. "My son is no angel, but he damn sure is no murderer," his mother, Cherie Smith, told the reporters that were outside the courthouse. Now, before the guards led Josh Bagwell away, Gail was allowed to say a few words to him directly. As she began to speak, imploring him to never forget Heather or the horror of his crime, Josh's relatives actually stood up and walked out of the courtroom. That is so disrespectful and disgusting. But Gail caught on to this, and she said, "By your family exiting, I can see why you are the way you are." And Josh just kind of stared at her. Gail said, "You haven't ever had to pay for the mistakes you've made, but now you're going to. You took away the most important thing in our life."
So Randy went on trial later that year, and he was found guilty of capital murder. He must serve a mandatory life sentence and will not be eligible for parole until the year 2036. He'll be 57 years old then. But considering the heinousness of the crime, it's uncertain if he will ever be released. Now, I'd keep him in for life. While the DA was proud of his victories in the trials, he has been more subdued when speaking about Randy Wood, who seemingly found the strength of character to take responsibility for his crime. He wanted people to know he didn't kill Heather, but he also seems to be the only one of the three who might have a conscience. Gail had said that he is redeemed in her eyes. "Heather lay in that creek for 8 days and he didn't tell me, so he must be punished. But a lifetime is too much for Randy."
Yeah, that's what she said, but,
Well, I don't know that I could be that forgiving and rational if my daughter was raped and killed.
I'm pretty sure I couldn't.
I'd keep that kid in jail.
Absolutely. Now, according to the law, it didn't matter that Randy had not been the shooter, and even if he hadn't wanted Heather dead, because in Texas, the law of parties removes any distinction between killers and their accomplices. By assisting Curtis, he was guilty of capital murder, and no matter what he said afterwards, there's really no getting around that. Heather Rich's father, Dwayne, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Carolyn Beaver and the hardware store for negligently selling the ammunition to Bagwell and/or Gambill. Now, his filing identified Beaver's negligence as the proximate cause of Heather's death. But the United States District Court denied the motion and found that there was no evidence that Beaver could have foreseen that Bagwell and Gambill would use that ammunition to murder Heather. And of course that's true, but I can still see why her father would feel that way and want to file the lawsuit. Gail and Dwayne Rich actually divorced sometime after Heather's murder. Gail said that the pain from the memories was just too great for them to overcome as a couple. Both of them moved away from Waurika. The Belknap Creek Bridge is still marked by the buckshot that tore apart Heather's body. On a concrete edge of the bridge, someone spray-painted one word: murderers.
Gail told Texas Monthly magazine writer Pamela Koloff in 2002 that the creek appears in her nightmares. She sees her daughter in the creek and reaches out to her, but Heather is too far away and she can never reach her.
And that poor mother, She had a fight with her. That's the last thing she said to her.
Yeah.
So
She'll
she has
live
to
with that.
just live with guilt.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, a little sidelight. In January 2002, Josh Bagwell and Curtis Gambill, along with 2 other inmates, overpowered 2 jail guards and escaped from the Montague County, Texas jail. They took the car of one of their jailers. Now, the 4 of them, all convicted of murder, eluded capture for 9 days. That'll get your anxiety up, won't it?
Oh, absolutely.
During that time, people in the area kept loaded guns on them, stayed home as much as possible.
It's really scary. You've got 4 murderers on the loose.
On the loose.
And they really have nothing to lose.
No. What are you going to do? Give me another life sentence?
Exactly. Now, they were caught at an Oklahoma gas station on February 7th. The other 2 inmates had been picked up outside of the store with no incidents. But Bagwell and Gambill held officers in a standoff for 6 hours. They held the 70-year-old owner hostage with a stolen gun. They both surrendered after negotiating with FBI agents, and Curtis and Josh had been serving their sentences in the state prison. But they'd been transferred to the Montague jail earlier that month for Curtis's prosecution on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, and that's when they'd managed to escape. Several weeks after this escape, prison guards prevented another escape when they found out that Josh's mother, Therese Smith, had given Curtis and Josh hacksaw blades hidden inside of 2 Bibles. She also sought out help to get firearms, cell phones, and maps for the escape. So she's just such scum. You can really see why her son has turned out to be so awful.
Right? Apple doesn't fall far.
No, apparently not.
So the man that Smith tried to recruit turned out to be Curtis Gambill's brother, Rick. But Rick Gambill notified the police, who then were able to record Smith discussing escape plans with him.
Well, good for him.
Yeah. So Smith had been acting as Josh's attorney and had access to him while in prison. Authorities said they watched her buy the hacksaw blades and confiscated them before Bagwell received them.
What an idiot as well as a scumbag she is.
Smith pleaded not guilty at first, but then changed her mind after seeing the evidence that prosecutors had against her.
So what's she trying to teach her son here? That it's okay to murder people and then lie and escape from prison?
Yep.
Well, she ended up pleading guilty in August of 2002 to conspiracy to assist in an escape and conspiracy to commit a felony with a firearm. And she was given a 20-year sentence. So pretty good. All but 8 years were deferred. So still, she spent some time in prison.
Yeah, and she's got a felony
and
against
she
her.
deserves it, so I'm sure she lost her law license as well.
I'll bet she did.
Yep.
So Randy Wood married a woman from New Zealand, Larissa Huya, in October 2016. She contacted him in 2014 after watching a documentary on Heather Rich's case. She was shocked to see such a young person in prison for over half his life and has tried to get him released early.
Yeah, the investigation into the death of Dennis Wayne Goss was reopened too, and the state medical examiner's office changed his cause of death from suicide to unknown. Goss's father, Dennis Goss Sr., told authorities his son had said a few days before dying that someone was trying to kill him. So that was interesting, but I've never found anything else about it, so I don't think there's been a conviction.
No, I mean, he had been associating with drug abusers, including Curtis Gambill, and his autopsy report showed he had methamphetamine in his system when he died.
Yeah, so it's likely a drug-related thing.
Right. And the medical examiner's report said that the wound could have been self-inflicted, and it was made to look like a suicide, but the shell casing next to him didn't match the wadding found in his head wound.
Well, and if that's absolute, then that is murder.
Then he was murdered.
Yeah. So it's really sad. Gail Rich died from cancer in 2015. Now, she had remarried in 2000, but her husband died in 2013. And Heather's father, Dwayne, died in 2014. He had remarried in 2001 after retiring due to his injuries that he'd sustained at work in the 1990s. So it's always just incredibly sad when such a young person loses her life, especially in such a brutal, completely unnecessary way. But then in this case, you have 4 teens whose lives were completely destroyed. Then you have the parents and siblings of those young people, who of course were never the same. In the case of Curtis and in the case of Josh, it's really hard to have any sympathy. At least Josh's family seems awful anyway. But of course Heather's murder was just as senseless as it was heartless. A very sad case. So I thank our listeners for recommending it. It certainly is an interesting case, although it breaks my heart.
It does. So TCB's music was produced by Mike McClellan. You can find out more about his work at his website, podcastps.com. If you have comments, a case suggestion, or a beer recommendation, please send us an email, truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com.
Or even better, leave us a voicemail.
You bet.
I'll put a direct link in our show notes, as always, that you can click on and record your voicemail for a future show. And you may be asking yourself, how can I support True Crime Brewery and get myself some bonus episodes, plus get all of my episodes without ads? Well, we've figured this all out for you. We have our True Crime Brewery premium option, where you get your own personal URL to add to your podcast app. And then you can subscribe to our show completely free of advertisements. Plus, you get at least one special members-only episode each and every month, and we'll send you a gift and some swag and a handwritten thank you note as well. Now, members also have the option of listening to the ad-free episodes on our website. So if you think you'd enjoy these benefits and you'd like to help support our show, just go to our website, that's tiegrabber.com, and take a look at our subscribing options. You also have the option of subscribing through Patreon, and you can do that by going to patreon.com/tiegrabber. Whether you support us by listening, sharing your feedback, leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, or subscribing as a premium member, we appreciate you, and we thank you as always.
It's time for listener feedback.
Okay, so today for feedback, we have something a little bit different. What we've decided to do is respond to the many requests we've had to talk about the Casey Anthony series and also what's been happening with the Delphi murder case. We have emails from Susan M. and Laura T. who are asking us about the Casey Anthony 3-part series, Where the Truth Lies, which is a ridiculous title for it.
It is.
I mean, we tried to watch it. We tried hard.
We did, but we only lasted about 10 minutes.
It's disgusting.
And the gag reflex took over.
It did.
I mean, it's clearly a puff piece, one-sided for Casey Anthony.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so melodramatic, like, oh, she's just missing her daughter, and it's so tragic for her, all the trauma she's been through.
Yeah.
It's really sickening. Just upsets me to think she was paid for this, which she must have been, if not directly. You know, they did find a way to give her money, obviously.
She received $200,000.
For this one?
Yes.
Oh, I know she had before. Okay. Well, at least, I would say.
So we know that Casey Anthony partied while Kaylee went missing.
Well, yeah, but she has a new story since her trial.
For 31 days in 2008, Casey behaved like a 22-year-old without a care in the world and never told anybody that her daughter had gone missing.
No, didn't seem upset or anything, really. Now, Casey's guilt is very much agreed upon by most people who follow true crime, and her acquittal and everything that led up to it, from her repeated thefts and that hot bod contest and partying to making up that nanny who supposedly kidnapped her daughter, is seen by most of us as a case of the justice system just failing miserably.
Yeah, and in this Peacock series, Casey tries to take control by pushing her own narrative. So she blames Kaylee's murder on her father and tries to excuse her own behavior on a lifetime of trauma and abuse. She accuses her father and her brother, George and Lee Anthony, of sexually abusing her and argues that her related trauma explains her long pattern of lies in connection to her daughter's disappearance. And I'm gagging as I try to talk about that.
I know.
George Anthony denied these allegations on the witness stand and has continued to do so. No evidence has ever been found.
And I don't believe it at all. I realize I could be wrong, I wasn't there, but I just feel really bad for her parents. I always have.
Yeah, for having her as a daughter.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of it is that they fucked up on their parenting of her, and they were an odd family. We read quite a bit about them back in the day.
They were, yeah.
But just the way that she threw them under the bus like that, when it seemed like they were bending over backwards for her, and they were pretty much raising Kaylee from what I could determine.
Yes, they were.
Yeah. So since we couldn't get through the, I guess you call it a docuseries, but it's really not a documentary if you ask me, we did watch the behavior panel on YouTube, which is something I like to watch from time to time. And these are the 4 guys that are experts in body language and behavior, and if people are telling the truth or lying. And, basically they determined that she was lying, no surprise. But one thing they decided was that she was deceptive and that the questions were softball questions that were not directed at trying to even get to the truth.
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah. So what the fuck was she doing for those 31 days before her mother, Cindy Anthony, called 911? Right? She was not worried about her daughter at all. But in this new series, she was claiming that she just thought her daughter was fine. Or she was in denial and wanted to think that.
Yeah. Well, her ex-boyfriend and friends from this time all have said that she was having fun and showed absolutely no signs of being worried or traumatized.
Right.
But in the show, she claims that her father had told her that Kaylee would be okay, and she believed that whole time that Kaylee was alive. She claimed she was in contact with George every day during that time, and she believed him. She said he told her she would be reunited with her daughter soon.
Okay. Now, just remembering the video of her talking to her parents from jail before Kaylee's body was found, it was all me.
Which we looked at.
Absolutely. And it was all about her. She never had any concerns for her daughter whatsoever that you could see. So why the series? It just seems to be condoning her repeated lies and, just gives her the media spotlight again, right? So she says she thinks her dad molested Kaylee and put her in the pool. So that's very vague. And then why the duct tape wrapped around Kaylee's head 3 times?
Yeah, I have a tough time listening to her story and not wondering how the duct tape ended up there.
Well, that's the thing. There are all these softball questions from what we could see. And yeah, even the judge had said before he thought it was an accident, but the duct tape just convinces me that it was on purpose.
Well, yeah.
Previously released documents have shown that the heart-shaped sticker that she had on the duct tape, that there were stickers of a similar size that were found during a search of the house that Casey shared with her daughter and her parents. So it's all very damning, and I still can't get over the fact that she was not convicted. This is really worse than the OJ case for me, because it's a baby, and it's her own baby.
Right.
Yeah. So I just hope people don't watch it. And I'm really pissed off at Peacock for giving her money. I think I'm going to have to just boycott Peacock. Not that they'll care if I don't watch it, but just out of principle.
Yeah, we got to tell them so they know that we're boycotting.
Okay. All right. So we think Casey just did this for money and is a disgusting human being, and whoever produced this thing is probably going to go to hell as well. Okay.
I think that covers it very well.
Okay. So nothing else to say on that?
No, but now you can give us some update on the Delphi murders. This is something requested by Brittany C.
Yes, so lots been going on. This happened back in 2017, and now we've had an arrest in October. Richard Allen was arrested. So he hadn't been previously mentioned as a suspect connected to Libby and Abby's deaths in Delphi, and he was known to go by Rick or Ricky. Allen lived in Delphi for at least 16 years, and his home is less than 2 miles from the Mononhai Bridge, where the girls disappeared from after going on a hike. I'm just going to assume all of our listeners are familiar with the basics of this case, because I'm sure they are. It's a very famous case, and it's been in the news a lot lately.
Yes.
But records would show that Richard Allen previously lived in Greenwood and Mexico, Indiana.
Since he's been accused, Allen has said in a court document that his wife had to leave their home and that he had lost his job and his wife had to leave her job.
Well, yeah, the Indiana News, WTHR, reported that Allen is a licensed pharmacy technician, and he got his Indiana license in 2018. He worked at the CVS in Delphi, even developing photos for Libby German's family after the murders. Photos for the memorial service, I believe.
Now, his defense attorney, Andrew Baldwin, says his wife is just a wonderful person, and she loves her husband. They've been married for over 30 years. Basically high school sweethearts. They love each other, and she fully supports him. Baldwin said Allen is confused and bewildered at the accusations against him, and Allen is not the person responsible for the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German.
So
yeah, that's what the mouthpiece is supposed to say for you, right?
Of course. Now, looking at the spouse, there's been a history of many of these killers where their spouses say they know nothing, and I'm going to admit I've been skeptical in many cases. In this case, I don't know enough about it to say anything negative about this woman, really. But I don't have a lot of sympathy either. Sorry. I have much more sympathy for the families of the murder victims. So a probable cause affidavit was released in late November for Allen's arrest, and the judge ended up recusing himself from the case and was replaced by a judge from outside of the county. But new information from the affidavit is pretty interesting, and that has been released.
Heavily redacted.
Yes, basically just the names of the witnesses were redacted.
Right.
So as the killer approached the girls, one of them mentioned the word gun. Now, in the video that was released earlier, that part was cut off. All we heard is guys down the hill. And they haven't released the whole video because, it's evidence, and I understand that. But we did learn that the word gun was mentioned. And that's important because there was a .40 caliber unspent round less than 2 feet from one of the girls' bodies lying between the two bodies. And they say that the round had extraction marks that match a gun owned by Richard Allen. So if that's true, that's pretty significant.
Certainly is.
But still, the affidavit doesn't tell us how they were murdered or if they were even shot. But the girls' clothing was found in the Deer Creek south of where their bodies were found. And also, 3 teen girls were interviewed, and one said that they were walking on the Monon High Bridge Trail toward the Freedom Bridge to go home when they saw a male walking from the Freedom Bridge toward the Monon High Bridge, and they described him as kind of creepy. They said he was wearing blue jeans and a light blue jacket, and they said that his hair was gray, maybe with a little brown in it, but that he didn't really show them his face. One of the girls said that his jacket was a duck canvas type jacket, which I don't know what that is. Do you?
Well, it's like the Carhartt jacket.
Okay. And she said that she said hi, but he just glared at them.
Yeah, and one of the girls recalled that he had something covering his mouth. She described him as not very tall, with a bigger build. She said he was wearing a black hoodie, black jeans, and black boots. She also stated that his hands were in his pockets.
And all that pretty much matches the video that we have been seeing for the past, 5 years?
5 years.
So one of those 3 girls showed investigators photos that she took on her phone while out on the trail that day. Her photos included a photo of the Monon High Bridge, taken at 12:43 p.m., and then another taken at 1:26 p.m. of a bench east of the Freedom Bridge. So the girl who took the photo of the bench as they started walking back toward Freedom Bridge is the one that says they encountered the man who matched the description of the photo taken from Libby's phone, from Libby's video that she had taken.
Yeah, and then there's another female who was on the trail that day and walked the Monon High Bridge and saw a man matching the description of the man on the video. She described him as a white male in blue jeans and a blue jean jacket. She also passed 2 girls on the Monon High Bridge who she believes were Abby and Libby.
So when she was leaving at 2:14 p.m., she noted a vehicle was parked in an odd manner at the old Child Protective Services building. She said it looked as if it was backed up to the building, maybe to hide the license plate. There was also a man on his way to Delphi on State Road 25 around 2:10 p.m. that day who said he saw a purple petite cruiser or small SUV parked backed up to the CPS building, and their drawings of where the car was parked were very similar, and their descriptions matched Allen's car. Another man told investigators that he saw a man walking away from the Monon High Bridge who wore a blue coat And he said the guy was covered with mud and blood, like he'd been in a fight. So that's very significant.
That's huge.
It really is.
So investigator interviews with Allen in 2017 revealed that Allen said he was on the trail between 1:30 and 3:30. He said that he saw the 3 female teens at Freedom Bridge. Then he walked to the Manon High Bridge. He said he didn't see anyone there, but said that he had been watching a stock ticker on his phone as he walked the bridge. Now, you've seen that video.
That bridge is treacherous.
I can't believe there's no side rails or anything. It's just railroad tracks over, a 50-foot drop?
Yeah, and they're kind of beaten up as well.
Yeah. I can't imagine. I wouldn't even be able to get out there and walk it.
Sure.
I'd have to crawl it or something.
Yeah,
on
me either.
Belly.
Right.
But it just blows my mind that somebody was able to walk it looking down at his phone at the stock ticker.
Yeah, and not see anyone else, not notice anyone.
Nope.
Well, on October 13th, 2022, Allen was interviewed again, and this time he said that he went to the Manon High Bridge to watch the fish, which to me is totally preposterous because the water is way far down.
Yeah, I like this story. Maybe he decided that the stock ticker on the phone wasn't going to work.
Well, it wasn't, but the replacement's not much better.
Oh, I think it's worse.
Yeah. Now, he did say that he did park his car on the side of an old building. He also told investigators that he'd been wearing blue jeans and a blue or black Carhartt jacket with a hood. And he said he owned firearms. Now, his wife, Linda Allen, confirmed that he had firearms and knives at the house. She also said that he still owns a blue Carhartt jacket.
And Allen's house was searched on October 13th, and they found jackets, boots, knives, and guns. And included in the guns was a .40 caliber pistol.
Yeah, now the laboratory confirmed that the .40 round found near the victims had been cycled through Richard Allen's pistol. Allen said that he had never let anyone borrow his gun, and when confronted about that on-spec round, he really had no explanation for it. He admitted that he was on the trail, but denied seeing Abby and Libby or being involved in their murders. Now, there's no mention in the affidavit of DNA or if there was blood found on any of these items. That doesn't mean it wasn't, it's just not mentioned in there.
I read in one of those updates, the girls were bloody and their clothes had been moved. They had been removed with their clothes and the clothing was a distance away from them.
In the creek.
Right.
Right. So the police believe that Allen is the bridge guy from the video and that he's the one that forced them down the hill to the location where they were killed, likely at gunpoint. Witness statements do corroborate the timeline of the deaths of the girls and the timeline that was admitted to by Richard Allen, so that all makes sense. But what doesn't make sense is why did it take so long to make an arrest?
Well, that's a good question. I'm thinking if I have these witnesses, one of whom describes the man as being muddy and bloody, and he matches the description of the man on the bridge, I think he should have been investigated more thoroughly back then.
Well, you would think so. But there was some mention of some kind of error. So if any of you know what I'm talking about, there was some mention that an error made him get overlooked in some way. Did you hear about that?
Oh, yeah, I read that too.
Yeah.
Initially, he was listed as an informant, not a witness, or...
A witness, not a suspect.
Right. I don't know how that works. A witness, but not a suspect. And if he's telling this like it is, he should have been a suspect.
Well, yeah, that's what we all think. But I guess we don't know enough about the details of the investigation to say too much on it right now.
Well, like you've pointed out, there's no DNA evidence that we know of. I will bet you that there's more evidence that hasn't been revealed.
Oh, certainly. I definitely think so. All they need in the affidavit is enough for the arrest and the investigation moving forward. But they probably have more than that. I really believe they have DNA.
Yes.
This wasn't just someone who came and shot them and left. Something was done to these girls. There was some kind of posing situation. I mean, it was really a horrible, horrible murder of these girls. We just don't know the details, and maybe we don't want to know.
But we'll find out.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. So he has a preliminary trial coming up February of 2023.
Preliminary hearing, yeah.
Okay. So then I thought, what about that Indiana man? Remember that? The guy who had a fake social media account that was potentially linked to the murders, but it was definitely a pedophile thing. Keegan Kline was accused of creating an account by the name of Anthony Schatz, where he used pictures of a cute young guy to communicate with underage girls and get nude pictures from them. But an affidavit filed in August of 2020 alleges that Kline admitted to investigators that he was the creator of the account, and now he's in jail on 30 charges. And those include child exploitation, child pornography, obstruction of justice, and child solicitation. So he has pleaded not guilty in that case and is in jail awaiting trial. So he hasn't been officially connected to the murders of Abby and Libby. But the person behind Anthony Schatz was one of the last to communicate with Libby German before her death. So she was being catfished by some kind of pedophile trying to groom her.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, after her death, the Anthony Schatz profile told another person that he was supposed to meet up with Libby, but she never showed up. So that's all very curious to me. I'm not sure what to make of all that.
I'm not either.
No, but certainly that Richard Allen looks like the sketches.
He looks like the sketches and the photograph from the phone.
Video, yeah.
The video from one of the girls.
Absolutely.
So he looks very much like that could be him.
I know, I just think that probably in a rural Indiana like that, a lot of guys dress that way.
Sure.
Yeah. But he's admitted he was there.
He's admitted he was there. He claims he never saw the girls. I find that hard to believe. He saw the 3 other hikers or walkers.
Yep.
And could mention them, but no word about Abby and Libby. So that's another thing. And then the whole thing about him being muddy and bloody. Yeah, holy cow.
That's a big deal. Well, did they know that was him? It looked like him. It was a similar person to him.
Certainly is.
Yeah. Certainly is him?
Certainly is a spitting image of him.
Yeah. So they have some good witnesses, a good timeline, and I imagine they have a lot more evidence we don't know about. I think it's a pretty strong case.
Yeah, again, without knowing what the evidence is, it's a circumstantial case, but it looks pretty good.
Well, yeah, I don't know if the bullet, that's kind of direct evidence, if it really did match up to his gun, and he has no explanation for that.
No, he doesn't. He has no idea how that bullet that matches his gun or goes with his gun ended up there.
Right, so that's hard to believe. And
Sure
he has
is.
no alibi. And the creepy thing is that people who knew Abby and Libby, including family, interacted with him afterwards.
Yeah.
And I just have to wonder if any people did call with tips identifying him to the police, because he does seem like he totally fits the profile. I guess no history, though, of any crimes like this that we know of.
That we know of.
Right, so there could be.
And I would say that whoever did this to the girls, I don't think that was the first killing.
Well, that's been said, yeah, that maybe it's a serial killer. Although I don't know if this Richard Allen is a serial killer. Could be. Or it could be someone that just had these fantasies for a long time and this is the first time he followed through. As far as pulling it off, it didn't seem to do that great of a job. There were a lot of witnesses to see him there.
Yeah. Well, and just whoever did this, posed the bodies, removed their clothing. There's just a whole bunch of stuff that would make me say that this person had killed before.
Sure. And if not killed before, definitely had been fantasizing and planning this. It wasn't some kind of spontaneous thing at all.
No.
Maybe he was out there trolling for girls. That's quite possible. And then he just came across these two.
Well, we'll start getting some answers next year.
Yeah, but let's hope they have the right guy and this will end next year, put an end to it for these families who have just suffered so much. Well, the whole community really has gone through a lot with this.
Right. Well, this is another one of those small towns.
It is, yes.
You know, things like this just don't happen.
No, and this kind of thing doesn't happen a lot anywhere. This is a really exceptionally horrible crime.
Truly. Yep.
Yeah, this isn't something that you hear about every day, thankfully. So yeah, it is curious that it took that long, so we'll have to keep our ears and eyes open to hear more on that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, so I'm sure we'll address that again in feedback. But I think we're going to wrap things up for today. We do have some voicemails and emails that we'll definitely get back to next week. But these things had just been something really talked about on our Facebook page and with our different listeners, so we did want to address it a little bit.
Yeah, I thought that was a good idea.
Well, yeah, we don't want people watching that Casey Anthony thing either. It's disgusting. But if you did sit through it and you have more to add, we're certainly open to hearing about it. Because I'm sure there's a lot we don't know about it because we couldn't sit through it. So I'm not going to encourage anyone to sit through it, but if you already have, we'd love to hear from you and hear what you have to say about it.
I like that.
Yeah.
We're not going to watch it, so if you watch it, please let us know what is going on in there.
Right. But I'm not asking you to watch it now. I'm saying if you've already watched it.
If you should happen to have watched it.
Yes. We're not encouraging anyone to watch it.
Call Jill.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
Well, thanks everyone for listening and for your feedback. And we hope you've had some wonderful holidays and have a wonderful 2023 coming up.
It's almost here.
It is. So we'll see you next time at the quiet end.
Saving some seats.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.